Hey Spooky Reads fans! So I'm coming to you again from my middle school, one of the scariest places on earth. And behind me you can see the graveyard where old technology goes to die. You know there's still a VCR up there? And that television hooked to the wall hasn't been hooked to anything for 12 years, but it's still stuck to my wall. So there's the horror story of teaching in a public school for you. It's not the kids, it's the facilities. So today I'm going to talk about Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. So this is a gothic treat of a book. Oh my gosh, it's so good. I read this one when I was very young, and I read it again much more recently, sometime in the last 2 or 3 years, and I still love it. I think the key is the narrator. We've got this narrator who throughout the whole book never gets a name. Nowhere in the book does anybody call this poor woman by a name. But you know, she goes through such a transformation in the book, and it's a story about obsession, and it's a story about how far is too far and the lengths we'll go to when we're faced with troubles, and gosh, it's so good. So I'm going to read a bit from the beginning. This is one of those iconic beginnings. There's a few books where like the first paragraph is just one of those paragraphs, you know, Pride and Prejudice with that famous line about the universal truth that a man with a fortune must be in want of a wife. I'm sure I misquoted a little bit, but like that. And the beginning of Hill House, that paragraph about the house losing its own mind, and whatever walks there walks alone. And that's also the last paragraph of that book. Wow, it's gorgeous. So the very first paragraph of this novel is like that. And I'm going to read more than just the first paragraph because I love this opening of, the opening takes place after all the action of the book, and it's our unnamed narrator remembering Manderley and imagining what it must be like now that all the bad things have happened and she's writing this from someplace else. So here we go. Last night, I dreamed I went to Manderley again. It seemed to me I stood by the iron gate leading to the drive, and for a while I could not enter, for the way was barred to me. There was a padlock and a chain upon the gate. I called in my dream to the lodge keeper and had no answer, and peering closer through the rusted spokes of the gate, I saw that the lodge was uninhabited. No smoke came from the chimney, and the little lattice windows gaped forlorn. Then, like all dreamers, I was possessed of a sudden with supernatural powers and passed like a spirit through the barrier before me. The drive wound away in front of me, twisting and turning as it had always done, but as I advanced, I was aware that a change had come upon it. It was narrow and unkept, not the drive that we had known. At first, I was puzzled and did not understand, and it was only when I bent my head to avoid the low swinging branch of a tree that I realized what had happened. Nature had come into her own again, and little by little, in her stealthy, insidious way, had encroached upon the drive with long, tenacious fingers. The woods, always a menace even in the past, had triumphed in the end. They crowded, dark and uncontrolled, to the borders of the drive. The beeches with white, naked limbs leaned close to one another, their branches intermingled in a strange embrace, making a vault above my head like the archway of a church. And there were other trees as well, trees that I did not recognize, squat oaks and tortured elms that straggled cheek by jowl with the beeches and had thrust themselves out of the quiet earth, along with monster shrubs and plants, none of which I remembered. The drive was a ribbon now, a thread of its former self, with gravel surface gone and choked with grass and moss. The trees had thrown out low branches, making an impediment to progress. The gnarled roots looked like skeleton claws. Scattered here and again among this jungle growth, I would recognize shrubs that had been landmarks. Sorry, I had to move my phone to get to the words. Shrubs that had been landmarks in our time, things of culture and grace, hydrangeas whose blue heads had been famous. No hand had checked their progress, and they'd gone native now, rearing to monster height without a bloom, black and ugly as the nameless parasites that grew beside them. On and on, now east, now west, wound the poor thread that once had been our drive. Sometimes I thought it lost, but it appeared again, beneath a fallen tree perhaps, or struggling on the other side of a muddy ditch created by the winter rains. I had not thought the way so long. Surely the miles had multiplied, even as the trees had done, and this path led but to a labyrinth, some choked wilderness, and not to the house at all. I came upon it suddenly, the approach masked by the unnatural growth of a vast shrub that spread in all directions, and I stood, my heart thumping in my breast, the strange prick of tears behind my eyes. There was Manderley, our Manderley, secretive and silent as it had always been, the gray stone shining in the moonlight of my dream, the mullioned windows reflecting the green lawns and terrace. Time could not wreck the perfect symmetry of those walls, nor the sight itself, a jewel in the hollow of a hand. So, for anybody who's read and loved this novel, the house is absolutely a character. It's this big, wonderful ancestral home, just the kind that girls like me dream about growing up and owning, even though we grow up to be school teachers and we're lucky to afford a house at all. Right? It's sorry, my phone fell over and that strikes me as very funny. But anyway, Rebecca, the way that Daphne du Maurier writes, right? The description, the kinds of verbs she chooses, the describing words. I can so picture this whole scene of this overgrown path leading to this big, magnificent house, and combining with the house she remembers compared to how it would be now were she to go back. Now, none of that gives you much hint about the story, but I think it gives you a hint of what kind of writing you're in for. And it's a very tense kind of story, and it has a sad but perfect ending, and I highly recommend it. If you've not read Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, you totally should. You should also see the old movie version of it. I think it's Olivia de Havilland who plays the unnamed narrator. And gosh, the Mrs. Danvers in that old movie is fabulously scary. There's the scene by the window. Whew, yes, you need to see it. So happy Halloween, everyone. Enjoy your spooky reads.